James chapter 5. We're starting the last chapter of the book of James this morning. Excuse me. And James begins chapter 5 talking about money. And I thought about this. You know, it's interesting in America. We probably have more food than any nation in the world, maybe that's ever been. You know, more cheap food readily available to us. And yet one of the things that you do not talk about is how much people eat. I mean, that's just not considered good manners. And we probably have more wealth than any nation that's ever been. And yet, one of the things, it is rude to ask somebody how much they make. You know, it's like we have this problem with the abundance that we have. It's just an interesting thing, our relationship, I guess, with wealth. And if you go on Facebook, you know, there's always something there that people want. I wonder how people in other parts of the world view us because of our thoughts and things about money. Preachers, and I'm sure other people as well, but on social media, you're always getting contacted by other preachers and things in foreign countries, particularly India and Africa, quite often. And in the midst of those, and not always, but I'm going to say 50-60%, eventually they get around to asking for financial support. And you try to figure out some nice way to say, no, I can't do that. And yet I feel like that they probably think we're being disingenuous. And they wonder, why? Because what the viewpoint of Americans in the rest of the world is, we all have money. You know, we all have extra money laying around. So why won't they give it to us? You know, and it's hard to explain that to somebody.
You know, when I was in Korea and when I was in Panama, those people think that all Americans have a lot of money.
Yeah, that's just over into Mexico, it's that way. Yeah, and you know, they think all Americans have lots of money, lots of extra wealth.
Yeah.
And yet, in you know, thinking along those lines too about here we are in America, we have all this wealth, but what is one of our growing, and probably I would say politically, socially, outside of abortion and some moral issues, our greatest national threat, well, probably has to be the growing national deficit, the national debt. Now, what does it mean if you are in debt as a nation? You are borrowing more money in order to buy stuff that you don't have the money to buy. That's what debt is, you know. And so you wonder, how is it that we're have all this wealth that we do, and yet we don't have any more extra probably than most of the world, and we keep racking up this national debt to huge amounts. You know, just today the president announced a $2 trillion plan for infrastructure. You ever thought about how much a trillion is? I mean, it's mind-blowing. A billion minutes ago.
Well, actually, it's 1,000 billion is what it is.
Yeah, it's 1,000 billion, but a billion minutes ago, I'm trying to think, I may even have this wrong, it may even go farther back, but I think it's a billion minutes ago Jesus was on the earth. That's a billion, that's not a trillion. You know, a trillion is 1,000 of those. And so, you know, we have a $6 trillion COVID plan and then now a $3 trillion infrastructure plan, and you think, who's going to pay for all this? And they say, well, it'll pay out over time. And I say, I'm sorry, but you know, you could give every person on the planet, you know, Or you could go out and give 1 billion people $1,000 each. 1/6 of the planet, you could give them $1,000 each, and that would be 1 trillion. So, it's just a huge amount of money, huge amounts of money. So I guess to say that for all the wealth that we have a poor handle on it. And I think that's probably true for most people. Wealth seems to be something that eludes us as far as our ability to keep it in perspective. Now there are people that do, and they are fairly rare, and you tend to see it because the Lord gives it to them to use, because they know how to use it. But James chapter 5 shows that in Jerusalem, first century, probably the same issues. He says, now listen, here's one of those, now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming upon you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Your corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. He says, you that have wealth, you need to be bemoaning the fact that you have all this wealth stored up. Jesus says it's hard for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven, Luke chapter 12. I wonder if we believe that. Solomon talks about the misery that comes with wealth. And I thought, I wonder if we believe that. We're more inclined to say, Lord, if wealth brings misery, let me suffer. That's kind of, that's kind of our approach to things. I'm ready to suffer some of that misery. It's hard for us to imagine, but you hear people that win the lottery and stuff, and they will talk about how terrible it was. I mean, emotionally and socially and everything else, the great problems that it brought. We have this idea that wealth is all good, that it can't have difficulties. And yet here James ties their misery and their wealth, and particularly the misery that's going to come upon them, to their wealth. So what's the problem with their wealth? And he says it's because you have hoarded it up. What's the worst thing you can do with money? In American value, waste it. You shouldn't waste your money, which is an interesting idea in general. The idea that what exactly qualifies as wasting it. But you shouldn't waste your money. It's better to save it. That's the American thinking. It's better to save it than to spend it. But James says that you can waste your money by saving it just as much as you can by spending it. Because if you save money, what happens to it? You put it in
somebody else gets it.
You put it in a bank, and eventually somebody else gets it. And what did that money do? What did you do with that money if you saved it and saved it and saved it and then leave it to somebody else? What did that money do? A lot of things. You have wasted it, and that's James's point. You're accumulating wealth, but you're wasting it by accumulating it, by hoarding it. He even portrays it as being evil. Now that's not very American to talk about saving money as being evil. And I don't think James is going against people who try to use their money well and let their money accumulate more money in order that they can use it well. That's not James's point. It's the idea that somehow I am accomplishing something by the fact that I am building up this huge stockpile of money. James says that will testify against you in the last day. How could it testify against us? How could that be a testimony against us that we have all this wealth? Well, first of all, because money is meant to do something with. It's meant to accomplish something. And it could be that the reason why you have stored up wealth is because you did not use it to do the things that God gave you the money to do something, and then you didn't do it. Instead, you kept the money stuck back in the bank. That's, we in America, we think of wasting money as spending it when we should have saved it. But James says you can also waste it by saving it when you should have been using it to do something. Wealth that has been laid up in the last day, he says, has been wasted to the person who saved it. Now, remember, James lives in a little different system, and if somebody is intending to lay up wealth in order to pass it on to other family members, if that's the purpose of it, different story. James is just looking at the fact that God gives us wealth in order to use it. And so if we're saving our money rather than using it to do what God wants, then we've wasted it for the last day. More particularly, he says, look, he's talking to the rich. Now, you think James is pointing the finger? He started out by saying, look, now listen. And now he says, look, in verse 4. James is a little bit emphatic here. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workmen who mowed your fields are crying against you. The cries of the harvest have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. Now there's the first problem. And when we talk about things money that you should have distributed, you should have used, that you kept for yourself, here's the first particular problem that James is looking at. And that is that some of that money is there because you stole it from the people that worked for you. Now you didn't steal it in the sense that you took it away from them. It's just that it was theirs and you never gave it to them. One of the struggles of the free market system is that, or capitalism and free market, is that we're always trying to figure out how to get something at the lowest expense, at the lowest price, and how to bring down those expenses. But there's only so many things you can cut production cost in order to bring down the price of something so that more people will buy it. And so one of the temptations is that one of the places you want to bring down the price of something is don't pay your workers as much. Keep down your workers. So you're increasing your profitability on the backs of those who actually have earned it. And that seems to be what James has in mind here. Now, and remember, in the first century, there's only two classes of people. We have a middle class. We have the very wealthy, middle class, lower class. Middle class, the upper class has a great deal of wealth. But he said you failed to pay the people who have earned the money. You failed to pay them fairly. You have held back wages. That's one of the problems about how they handle their money. The second is you have lived on earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. We call this indulging. I saw the other day a pair of tennis shoes for $1,000. You can buy these pair of tennis shoes for $1,000. And I thought, who in their right mind needs a $1,000 pair of tennis shoes? Even somebody like an NBA player or something that's got some really, they're really invested in those feet. $1,000 for a pair of tennis shoes? There has to come a point in which you have to look at yourself and you say, I'm just indulging. If I go out and want to buy a Maserati and I have the money to do it, am I right to do it? And people say, well, if you have the money to do it and you've earned the money right, you can do it. And I say, yeah, but there's another side of it. If I can buy a Maserati, but my neighbor can't buy groceries,
that's wrong.
Then my self-indulgence is evil. And that's what James is getting at here. There is a point when self-indulgence is evil. You know, it's not only about how the money is gained, but it is also about, am I spending it on myself when God would have me to do other things with it? James says that we indulge sometimes. Lastly, he says, you have condemned and murdered innocent men who were not opposing you. Wealth has always brought about political strength, and that shows up in the courts quite often. And he says sometimes you use those riches in order to treat other people unjustly and to victimize other people. And so for those three reasons, he says, your wealth is testifying against you in the last day. Those are pretty strong words. He's going to start the next section. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the Lord's coming. You know, and talk about the other side of things and being willing to suffer until the Lord comes. And we'll get into that next week. But this is just a challenging thing, you know. And I would point out that James is not advocating that it's a sin to be rich or to be wealthy. That's not his point. You know, just because you have wealth does not mean you have hoarded it or that you are hanging on to it when the Lord wants it. No, you may just be using it well. And just because you have lots of wealth does not mean you got it unjustly or that you are using it to victimize others, which is the three things James looks at. Wealth is just a tool. Just a tool. And it's just a tool that you use in order to do something with. That's James's point. And so like everything else we have, our time, our health, our possessions, everything else, we use those in order to serve and make other people's lives better and to know God. It's not a sin to be wealthy. And once again, our tax code is set up to make it seem that way, or implies that. I did tax return the other day for a deceased lady who died last year, and the money she left to her family, she paid 24% in taxes. One out of every $4 that she had earned and accumulated through her life, when she died, she gave it to the government. And I thought, that's a shame.
I think that's wrong. I really do. But after somebody dies, to have to pay taxes on the money that they leave.
Well, and I wouldn't have minded the 12%, or matter of fact, in this case, that was part of the situation was the family were expected to pay 12%. That's kind of where what you'd think for a tax code. They weren't ready for 24%.
When I was in Panama, they don't have taxes per se.
Yeah.
But 20% of everything they earn goes to the government.
Yeah.
And that's it. So that when it comes, you don't get nothing back. You don't file no income tax or anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's just,
yeah. Well. There's a lot of advocacy for a straight tax in our system, and I tend to be one of those that a flat tax.
But everybody, no matter how much money you got or what you have, you pay 20% to the government.
Yeah, well, something else I'll have to edit out of the tape, but just for y'all, I'm a firm believer, having done taxes and stuff and everything. I'm a firm believer in a flat tax that everybody gets. Everybody pays this percentage of their income in income tax, and then after that, it's user tax. Tax on gasoline, tax on stuff, so that as you're using stuff, then you're paying taxes. Rather than on income, you're taxing spending is what you tax. And anyway, that's my personal, I've got some others, but I'll leave that with that. Solomon, one of the richest people in the world, says a lot about wealth. Yeah. And he keeps coming back to it, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes particularly. And I love his Proverbs 30 verse 8 says, he prays, Lord, give me neither riches nor poverty. And I thought that's an interesting, from somebody that's rich. Lord, give me neither riches nor poverty. because he realized that both of those things carry tremendous temptations, tremendous challenges.